Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tia's Conspiracy Channel.
Oh my God, stop.
Fucking conspiracies.
I swear there's a method to my madness.
I had to roast you from the jump. So wait, so what the fuck are we doing? So, okay, I'm gonna pull up the chart. We're obviously talking about astrology,
Yes.
and I guess, okay.
We're going to talk about Sag new moon, and then you're mentioning the outer body planets.
Yeah, let's do this out of
planet. Fucking with the Pluto return.
So I'm gonna be fucking grumpy as shit on this. So I'm.
Oh my gosh, really?
So, okay, just really simply, right? There's a couple of different things we need to go over here, so y'all motherfuckers can wrap your heads around what the fuck is going on. So, everyone can see. You can see the chart, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say everyone. There's only one person on the call currently. Okay, so we are going all the fucking way back to this shit here, which is the Pluto-Uranus conjunction. This is when both of my parents were born, 1965. I think this was big year for Bob Dylan, big year for Jimi Hendrix, right? You got all the hippy dippy shit going on right before the Vietnam War, right? Richard Tarnas talks about this in his book Cosmos and Psyche. So this is kind of, if you want to look at the archetypes, so Pluto, Uranus in the sign of Virgo. The way we are chopping wood and carrying the water is undergoing a significant, think of this as like a lightning bolt to the ground. A really big change in the way that the everyday affairs in the world are being conducted. It's obviously hit the US pretty hard. But the 60s in general were a time of social and political revolution. You could think about the, the fucking French students in Paris, Guy Debord, very interesting, worth looking up, Black Panthers. There was just a lot of fucking revolutionary shit going on in this period of time, and the Uranus-Pluto conjunction is pretty key indicator of that. So this is what, 60 years ago. And basically what we're looking at, I'm going to put on a little time lapse. What I want everyone to do is pretend like I drew a fucking circle around these. What's going to happen is Pluto's going to move pretty slowly this way. Uranus is going to move a little faster this way. And we're going to hit the first quarter square in the year of around 2010. So we're going to let this shit run. Where are we now? 1990. There's Pluto and Scorpio. This is my generation. And there's Uranus. See, the separation is happening here. We're about to hit that first quarter square. Give it 2 decades or 3 decades or what the fuck ever. And bam, here we go. First quarter square is being initiated. I don't know if y'all remember this period of time, right? 2012, I think, was pretty significant in the, I use the term from fucking True Detective, the psychosphere. The fucking psychosphere. It's, what did he say? I could smell the aluminum and ash, like the disturbed psychosphere. It was some fucking bullshit that he said. That's funny. And the other character is like, I want you to shut the fuck up. The dynamic is funny. But anyways, yeah, so it's this quarter of this shit is what's going on. This is the first quarter square of that separation that occurred in 1965. So we're seeing, if you want to think about the squares, right? This is some really fucking useful astrological information. So whatever motherfuckers are out there, if you want to jot this down, the new moon. So let's say the new moon is the conjunction of Pluto and Uranus. That's the new moon of the Pluto-Uranus cycle. That's when you have the idea, right? So there's something that's being seeded during that new moon. Then the first quarter moon, this is when the conversation happens, or it's like, okay, on the new moon, it's like, I'm not happy with this relationship. The way this shit is going is not working. So you could think of that in terms of the Pluto-Uranus archetypes in Virgo, the way that this everyday life shit is not working. It's being fucking blown up. The first quarter square here is where we sit down and have the conversation about what we need and want. So this dynamic that was exploded here in the 60s is being engaged again. I can think of this period of time, Occupy Wall Street, the first black president. There's a lot of shit going on. And I'm going to look at the United States again. The Arab Spring is another good example. There's a lot of stuff going on here that has echoes of this revolutionary period of time, where these changes that were seeded during the 60s are coming up again. A lot of psychedelics. I tripped acid maybe over like 100 times over the course of this fucking square. So I mean, I don't know about y'all, but like the psychedelic stuff was coming up. There was a lot of people doing psychedelics. This is when the group the Death Grips got pretty big. They cited Jimi Hendrix as one of their biggest influences. Really kind of blowing holes in a lot of the genres. I think Crystal Castles was pretty big then. So you want to think about that kind of stuff. There's a lot of genre bending music, a lot of stuff with gender and sexuality coming to the fore. So this is when the conversation here is happening. First quarter square conversation is happening with that initial conjunction, Pluto and Uranus in Virgo. Now, Pluto is obviously, this is the early degrees of Capricorn, which we are now experiencing the end of the transit of, which we will get to with the Pluto return. And Uranus is in Aries, which we will see soon is going to enter Taurus. So this is the theme here, right? We had that new moon of Pluto and Uranus in 65, and we're seeing the separation occur over a pretty large swath of time. This is 50 years later. So what I want to get to here, right, is we're going to see that this square continues, right? This is even tighter. 8 degrees, 9 degrees square Aries in Capricorn. 2013, 2014, I'm going to speed up here to 2020. And what I want us to see here is that this dynamic is breaking and bending, right? You can see Uranus has now breached Taurus, and Pluto is still lagging a bit in Capricorn. So you can see that the theme here is being stretched a little bit. But what happens is we have a new massive outer planetary theme that's being initiated, which is this massive full moon, or I mean new moon rather, of Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn conjunct at the end degrees of Capricorn, right? So this is 2020. We're kind of later into the year of 2020, but this is something that this was the theme that was occurring all of 2020. We felt this the entirety of 2020. The orb was there and present. So I want to see now, right? We had that at the end of 2020, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, another new moon, right? So think of these are pretty massive outer planetary cycles that are all hitting. In 2020, there were 2 major ones that hit in the same year. Jupiter, Saturn conjunct at the end of Aquarius, and Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter conjunct in the late mid degrees of Capricorn. Massive, massive seeding of a large cycle. As you can see, right, Saturn separating here from Pluto and Jupiter separating here from Pluto. These are cycles that are going to last with Saturn several decades, Jupiter, I think around a decade, 13 years, right? So keep these things in mind, right? Because this is another outer planetary cycle that was initiated in the same year. And then 10 years before, we had the first quarter square of Uranus and Pluto from 1965. So in the span of about 60 years, we have these pretty massive outer planetary contacts. And what you can see here in November 2021 is the Saturn-Uranus square, right? So Saturn just made contact with Pluto, got the message from Pluto, and as soon as it breaks the orb of that conjunction, immediately comes into a square with Uranus. And that was the past year and a half. So fast forward here to November 18th, 2020. I just went a year ahead. We have the separation as in Saturn coming closer and closer. This was a third quarter square. Third quarter square of Saturn-Uranus, the synodic cycle, is you get the results, feedback, whatever ripple effect that was created at the full moon. The full moon is the enlightening moment. So when Saturn was back here opposite Uranus, it received some enlightening information. And through here, it's basically like the hands are off the steering wheel. Third quarter square crisis of consciousness. This is what happened. We're assimilating this. We're assimilating this information that Saturn got after the full moon and conjuncted Pluto from the Pluto-Uranus square of 60 years, which is the first quarter square. Uranus is separating this way. Saturn's closing in on Uranus. So you see the baton is basically being handed off from the first quarter square of Pluto-Uranus and the last quarter square of Saturn-Uranus after Pluto conjuncted Saturn. Are we seeing that transition here? Pluto conjuncted Saturn at the end degrees of Capricorn. This is a massive structural shift that's undergoing. This is basically the bones of the social structure. Saturn is being passed the baton to come into this conjunction with Uranus, which is going to happen in several years. So these outer planetary transits are forming the background of what is going on. That's really been going on, I would say, since at least the 60s, if we want to trace it back to that, which was, again, that period of massive social and political upheaval, particularly in the United States. If we want to look here at Pluto, this is what we're going to be talking about later, the Pluto return for the United States. So, I mean, obviously, Tia and I live in the United States, and that's kind of our frame of reference politically, socially, and culturally. I mean, that's kind of just like what it is. I mean, that's what we're getting. So that's kind of what we're talking about for the most part here. But obviously, again, these are international themes, and they're going to apply socially and culturally depending on where you live. But again, this is a cosmological cycle. This is a metaphysical and archetypal cycle. So this is impacting all of these different cultural branches and locations in different ways. But again, what we have to keep in mind here is the Pluto return is for the United States as a nation, or as we're going to talk about, a governmental system. So these are the outer planetary transits to keep in mind. I think what we'll see here, I want to take it all the way to the Saturn-Uranus conjunction. Here, 2032, I think there will be a pretty significant changing of the guard here in Cancer, right? This is a pretty significant placement for the United States. We can talk about Cancer in the United States chart, but this is also, again, we were talking about the first quarter square between Uranus and Pluto, where Saturn was passed the baton, and the third quarter square between Saturn and Uranus. First quarter square between Uranus and Pluto was the mid-2010s. Last quarter square between Saturn and Uranus was the past 2 years. So we're going to have about a 10-year period where Saturn is going to slowly come into conjunct Uranus, and I think that will be a pretty significant transit. But again, this is stuff to keep in mind in terms of the outer planetary transits that are kind of, these are the themes that are in the background of the moon cycles that we've been discussing.
All right. Uh-oh, do I have sound? Okay, I do have sound.
So that's the end of the Saturn-Uranus square. We just experienced the end of that. This is over. This is fucking done. Past year and a half is done. This is separating now. Saturn is direct, and it's going to go straight into Pisces. So what this is symbolizing currently, Saturn square the nodes, square Uranus separation, is that we have been experiencing as a collective a turning point in the larger direction of the collective psyche at this point in time. North Node Taurus, self-embodiment, self-sovereignty, self-empowerment, embodying the higher self, Uranus conjunct the North Node, embodying the higher self messages and wisdom from the higher self. After this South Node transit, again, of the lunar and solar eclipses, of a sort of purging of the personal planets, where this message is being transmitted on a very literal, physical, and immediate level in terms of the sense of self, the way that we're communicating the self, and the way that the values of the self are being incorporated into this larger, higher metaphysical, cosmological self, which we're going to talk about with the Sagittarius new moon, which is, again, rising up out of the depths and the darkness of Scorpio, the transformative process, into the light of day. The phoenix transforms into the eagle and rises into a new day and a new dawn, where we will see with this new moon chart all of the personal planets that were conjunct the South Node in Scorpio have now breached into Sagittarius. Again, Sagittarius is the rising, into a philosophical awareness or larger cosmological perspective. Jupiter, right? Jupiter's ruler of Sagittarius here, that incorporates this knowledge from the depths, the psychological depths and darks and deeps of Scorpio, which is kind of the encounter with the monster, the beast within. You talk about the labyrinth mythologies, things like that. You go into the labyrinth to encounter the beast. Look into the abyss. The abyss gazes back into you. All of that type of bullshit. And then you come out here, and we're getting a larger perspective, and we're looking at it from a metaphysical perspective or a philosophical perspective back on the experience. We're reflecting back on the experience through the light of Sagittarius rising out of the depths. So this is a powerful experience. But again, right, this is a kind of a microcosmic cycle. If we're talking about the moon cycles, which is occurring within this larger prism of the outer planetary transits, namely this square separating. What this outer planetary transit of the Saturn square Uranus separating after the conjunction to Pluto, which holds the information from the Uranus-Pluto square of 10 years prior and 60 years prior with the conjunction. We're experiencing a changing of the guard. And this is something that's difficult, right? Because it's occurring, we experience it on the personal level with the eclipse information, the eclipse transit the south node, where we're shedding these old ideals and values. But we're also experiencing it on the collective level as the Saturn-Uranus square separates Saturn square the nodes, Uranus conjunct the north node. Now, if this was Saturn conjunct the north node, the archetypal information would change significantly, and we would be headed towards more of an affirmation of the Saturnian, Capricornian, or Aquarian types of paradigms, which are more around the solidification of a structure. And Saturn is the one breaking the square, so that element is there. But again, with the Uranus conjunct the north node transit, this orb is still incredibly tight. The way that I'm reading this, and I could be totally wrong, but it just seems to me pretty basic to be reading the archetypes, is that we are headed in this direction of a pretty profound reevaluation of what life on this earth means, particularly in regards to self-sovereignty, self-embodiment, and these things that really are the embodiment and incorporation of a true personal, and I'll say in the Aquarian sense, human valuation of what life means that is not based around the plutocratic systems of years, decades, and even centuries prior. That's the archetypal exchange and the information here between Saturn in Aquarius, square Uranus and Taurus. Uranus and Taurus is seeking the embodied wisdom of the higher self. Saturn in Aquarius is about how are we consolidating power, knowledge, information, all of these systems that it gets in contact with Pluto conjunct Capricorn, that as Pluto leaves Capricorn are falling apart. But now the question for Saturn is, what is our sense of community in light of that, in light of this conjunction to Pluto, archetypal information square, Uranus and Pluto of a decade prior? So I hope I'm articulating this clearly. It should be pretty clear. I don't really think I'm speaking too abstractly here, but this information that Saturn got from this Pluto conjunction after the Saturn square Uranus of 10 years prior, it is now integrating at an archetypal level, square the nodes, in regards to how are we going to create a more human, global-centric community or society or collective or whatever it is that contains and allows for this sense of radical, unique individuality and self-sovereignty in an embodied sense, not just in an ideological sense, which would be Jupiter, but in an embodied sense, Uranus, North Node, Taurus. Am I coming through clear here?
That makes sense to me, and actually ties into the conspiracy theory.
Fucking shit.
It does. Like, okay, so I know like the topics might seem a little conspiracy theorist like, but I'm coming at it from more of a karmic standpoint to, I guess, see the patterns that are taking place and how they're tying in right now. That this is really just everything kind of coming back full circle for what happened way back when, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Here, I got your chart. 1 second, guys. I'm pulling up Tia's chart. Can everyone see the chart?
Oh, come on.
I had to do it. Tom. I had to do it. Okay. So what do you want to do? What's the angle here?
Okay, so let me preface by saying that I don't really give a shit about politics. I don't care. It's an area of life that there's a lot of bullshit. People spew a lot of bullshit, and I don't listen to any of it, but I can't help but notice the pattern of like factions starting to come forth, if that makes sense. So I was listening to this podcast. Actually, it was an astrology podcast, and I decided to look into the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and like their start dates based on something that was said. And I think it was by oh my god, help me out, I did not just forget his name. It's that guy that we both like on the podcast.
Oh, Austin Coppock.
Yes, Austin. He said, power is always in the house of the dragon. So it kind of got me thinking, and I wanted to look at these charts just to kind of see what's going on, what's transiting right now.
Okay.
So for a little bit of history, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party actually were formed as a faction in Congress, right? Originally, it was known as the Democratic Republican Party. And that was established May 13th, 1792, if my source is correct. And it was basically shut down in 1834. And as a result of that, what we now have is the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Democrats are a little bit more populist driven. Republicans tend to be a little bit more economically driven. Anyways, so my hypothesis on this is that part of the reason we're seeing so much of this divisiveness, I don't think it necessarily has to do, at least exclusively, with anything coming out of anyone's mouth, but the energy that the parties instituted when they formed. And like I said, they formed based as a faction, in Congress. So that energy kind of carries over. And I'm curious to see if part of the reason we're seeing some of the things that we are is just because it's coming full circle, because either new parties are about to emerge, or one of them is going to go away, or we're going to end up with another faction. So let's see here. Looking at the chart.
Pluto conjunct the south node of the Democrats.
Wow. Ain't that some shit?
Saturn. Well, we have to turn off. Okay, I'm just gonna do this because we don't have an actual fucking birth time, so it's gonna be a bit of a lie if we're using the ascendants. So I'm not gonna let that go down.
And yeah, just for everyone out there, I could not find specific times. So if you are something of a historian and please drop that in the comments.
This should be.
Yeah, my mind.
All right, so what are you looking at here?
Well, I was just looking at how, as you were pointing out, the north node appears to be on top of the Pluto.
Oh, it doesn't appear to be. It is. Or the south node.
Oh, wow. That's like
south node is conjunct the Pluto of the Republican Party.
Interesting. Okay. Let me see here. What else? And then the Democratic. I mean, can we count the MC without the birth time?
No, I'm not doing that. I wouldn't advise that at all.
Okay. Well, it looks like
Sun
the Mercury placement is within, actually the Mercury and the Sun of the Republican Party is within orb to the Pluto placement of the Democratic Party.
That's a conjunction. Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense.
Pluto is written all over this.
Factions, so. It makes sense for the political factions. It's like one of them wants what the other one doesn't. So.
Yeah, this is kind of nuts. Yeah, Pluto is written all over this. So that directly ties into
Mars
the
and
Pluto
Jupiter
return.
Uranus, Taurus. Let's see.
Is that within orb? I don't think that's within orb, right? At 10 degrees.
Mars and Jupiter square the moon. What do you mean? That's an exact opposition.
Ah, okay. I wasn't even looking over there. Okay. Oh, wow.
Saturn opposite Chiron. Yeah, it's just ugly.
It is very ugly. And so that kind of explains some of the behavior we're seeing.
The synastry is trash. The synastry is like abuser and abused.
Wow.
Whoever this is, if I was reading their synastry chart, they should not fucking be together. Delete. Swipe left.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Again, like I said, this was just a hypothesis and, kind of tied in with everything that we're seeing building up to this Pluto return, right? So looking at this, yeah, Pluto is written all over this. So there might even be, I don't know. I can't even say because we've got Uranus up in the equation. Like, who the fuck knows what's going to happen? But I think this is going to get messier than it is right now, just based on looking at these two charts.
It's just a bad marriage. They need a divorce.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily what the I guess what we could do is pull up the
Sibley chart.
Yeah. We want to look at the Sibley chart. That's the outer ring. Yeah, see all this, the Cancer placements right there that I was talking about with the conjunction that's coming up with Saturn and Uranus to complete the third quarter square in 2032. That conjunction's happening on the United States, Venus, and Jupiter. And then obviously right now, if we're just pulling the transits for now, you can see here, right? We're about to have really what is going to be, oh, fucking shit. It changed the Sibley. We're going to have next year what is going to be the final pass of this Pluto, because what this Pluto is going to do is go into Aquarius and then retrograde back still on the anaretic. It's like late 28th, which is not going to conjunct exactly this Pluto, and then go into Aquarius for good than the year after 2024. So that is going to be that for the Pluto return. Pluto return is technically over in 2024. I would say because of the sign, the sign change. 2023 is still going to be active. Again, if we're looking at the Sibley, we're going to have in 2032 that Saturn-Uranus conjunction right here. But then also, if we wanted to look at the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, that's and that's a Saturn opposition. That's interesting. On the 65 chart for the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, Saturn's opposite. So you can see pretty clearly the law and order separation there. It's pretty not a lot of law and order when Pluto and Uranus are involved.
Right.
And Pluto and Uranus, that's just too heavy for a Saturn. Saturn's going to crumble under that. There's just no way. Pluto and Uranus hold so much more power and sway. And you have here the South Node, which was actually square this. It's pretty powerful. All in the cardinal signs.
Mars, this is going to get messy.
Mars came to conjoin it. That's a pretty tense. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the eclipse season that we just had, honestly. Saturn square the nodes. Here you have Saturn square the nodes again. Saturn was opposite Uranus in 65, but it's square Uranus with the nodes during this current eclipse season. So I'm hearing a lot of 65. I've been listening to personally a lot of like Jimi Hendrix and stuff like that. It's kind of in the air.
Yeah.
I feel like, and obviously, right, this is right before the Vietnam War that we're talking about. Let's see. Jupiter conjunct Venus in Cancer, an amplification of the natal patriotism of the country on the Sibley. But I don't necessarily care to go too much more into this.
Yeah, but you can take them down. It helps to have the visualization, especially since I don't have the software. I mean, I knew Pluto is playing a really huge part just based on where it landed in the US natal chart, but I hadn't heard or seen anybody actually look at the individual parties that are currently running the country, for lack of a better word, into the ground, but I digress. So it's interesting to see just how abrasive both of those charts are together. and where
Yeah,
that Pluto is and how the Pluto is acting. And so like when we actually hit that Pluto return, like it's going to be messy.
Pluto conjunct South Node, Pluto conjunct Mercury and Sun. Like this is like domestic abuse. Like this is Chiron conjunct South Node in the natal chart for the Democrats. Chiron conjunct the South Node in the natal chart for the Democrats conjunct the Republicans Pluto. Yeah. There's not a lot to like. I'm looking for like a good signature or something. I mean, if someone really cared that much, you know, I'm sure you could find something good about it. But
yeah, no, I'm not seeing anything good
for this particular time, right? If we're just looking right now, we got the balsamic moon in Virgo. We're gonna have the new moon in a couple of days here. This balsamic moon phase is really the time where hands are off the steering wheel here. It's the fucking Jesus take the wheel moment after the eclipse. Really after the full moon, you can think of it this way. It's that for the first quarter moon and the releasing around the new moon, there's a lot of, okay, it's where am I headed? What's going on? What do I want? How do I want the situation to go? Once the full moon hits, we have a manifestation. And then we kind of have a hands off the steering wheel moment as we hit that third quarter square, which was in Leo. And whatever's coming down the pipe is coming down the pipe. And we are watching it. We're just kind of, we're kind of letting go and surrendering to the process. And here we really hit that really fucking waning phase. And then obviously we go right into the new moon, which is the new seeding, right? So this is going to be pretty drastically different energy after the lunar eclipse. And I don't know really how much I can attest to it right now, because obviously we still have the sun in Scorpio finishing up these later degrees. We already have Venus and Mercury ingressed into Sag. What is interesting about this new moon is that you're going to see here on the same day of this new moon, we have Jupiter stationing direct in Pisces. So this is a highly Jupiterian new moon. Obviously, Jupiter ruling Sagittarius, Sagittarius ruling Jupiter, but then also the trine to Jupiter with the new moon. That is a very strong trine. So if you want to think about what's going on here, last time we had this was like 1855. Charles Baudelaire wrote Flowers of Evil. It was published the year after. Gustave Moreau was very prominent during this period of time. It was a lot of hyper symbolist art, a lot of stuff regarding the archetypes and the power of the archetypes, mythology. There was a huge resurgence of that, particularly in, I want to say, European and French culture. What else can I think of to say here? Yes, this is very archetypal energy, particularly regarding how we are interpreting or constellating the larger psychic processes which are at work, which is going to be Neptune, the consciousness. This is a great kind of archetypal pairing if we were going to discuss the various different ways that ancient societies have classified the manifest or manifold gods as different forces which constitute the one sea or ocean of consciousness. This is a interpretive signature, particularly regarding the infinite. So very, very powerful energy. We had this conjunction in April of this year. This conjunction was exact of Jupiter and Neptune. Jupiter obviously went into Aries and re-ingressed back into Pisces during its retrograde cycle and is now stationing direct. So here, this is pretty powerful, right? Because Jupiter's been on the anaretic degrees and has kind of been going back and forth between 01, 00, 29, and 28 on the Alpha and Omega, as you said, Tia, Alpha and Omega of Aries and Pisces. So this is not only the anaretic degree of the sign 0, 1, 29, 28, but also the anaretic degree of the entire zodiac. So there is a lot up in this kind of Jupiterian theme as Jupiter comes to a close in terms of its own phasal cycle in the zodiac, right? It's going to hit 0 Aries and then begin another 13-year journey all the way around the zodiac. So this is a period of time where we're coming back to pick up anything that we left in the Piscean paradigm and bring it in to the new Aries cycle of Jupiter, which is really a new opening, a new expanse, something that is pretty profoundly open And again, we'll have Neptune make its way into Aries, I think in about a decade, little less than that. But this is a big time for Jupiter and Jupiter themes. So this is the expansion of interpretation, the things that we believe that are true, our various different belief systems, our philosophies, which ultimately either hold us back or imprison us in certain patterns and modes and modalities of living. Again, right, if we have the trine, Jupiter and Pisces, to Sun, Moon, Venus, Mercury, this is almost all of our personal planets that are up for this question. And I think it's going to be something that's going to flow pretty naturally here with the trine, where we're going to be asking ourselves these questions anyway. It's not going to be, this is going to be a part of the process here. What are we leaving behind? What are we letting go of in the Piscean paradigm of Jupiter and Pisces, the ocean and sea of consciousness, into the birth of a new Jupiter and Aries paradigm of this is the philosophy that I'm working with, the underlying metaphysics that I'm working with that is empowering and emboldening my life on a day-to-day basis, again, with the trine to the personal planets. So this is a great time to engage with philosophical pursuits, particularly in terms of cosmology. I mean, obviously astrology is a big part of that, but I would associate astrology more with Uranus. This is a great time to be questioning the points and places where your metaphysics or your cosmology is still in the Piscean paradigm, or still is struggling with individuation, or there's something that you're trying to bring into your intimate personal reality in terms of your personal direction, your I am, your Mars, which is now retrograde in Gemini, squaring this Neptune, and I would say really squaring the Jupiter as it has been for the past couple of weeks, retrograding back in Gemini. This is a lot of Mars reprogramming that's going on. There's a lot of reprogramming of the masculine. Which path are we choosing with the masculine right now? How is the masculine speaking in our everyday lives? That is up, and I think that is going to be a huge part of this moon. Here, obviously, you can see square to Neptune and Jupiter. Reprogramming that masculine, which is our life force, our drive, our primal direction, our Aries, which is this is what I'm doing now. It's pretty mindless ultimately, but in the sign of Gemini, it's going to have a lot to do with speech and communication. Thinking twice is something that Mars is not really accustomed to doing. But in doing so, we're reevaluating this Jupiterian paradigm of our cosmology, of our metaphysics, as we are preparing for the final ingress of Jupiter into Aries. Powerful time to do Mars work. I don't think Mars is really on the war path right now, as much as we are doing that reevaluation in an internal way, particularly as it relates to this cosmology, which is the overarching driving force of our lives. This is a great time to be asking those philosophical questions, because as we move out of this eclipse season, right, I'm going to say the eclipse portal ends with that new moon in Sag, we are taking a vastly different perspective. We're coming at this from a very different angle. This is the eagle. We're shooting out of the depths of Scorpio into the eagle mode, reflecting on this eclipse season and deciding, okay, with our masculine energy, with our drive, how are we orienting ourselves in our lives with this cosmology, which is up for change, right? This is a 13-year seed. That's going to be the seed cycle, which is going to be right here at the 0 degrees Aries in a couple of weeks. So what we're really preparing for here, I'm just going to go over it again because we've fucking gone over it, is Saturn in Pisces. Well, there we go. 0 degrees, 0 minutes. Fucking perfect timing. March 23rd here. This is what we're preparing for. And if we're looking at it in terms of months, 1, 2, 3, 4, exactly 4 months after the Sag new moon, this is what's up. Because, right, if we're talking about Mars getting out of its retrograde cycle, not only out of retrograde, but out of shadow, about to ingress into Taurus, Pluto, 0 degrees, Aquarius, Saturn, 1 degree, Pisces. This is a totally new paradigm here. This is the integration work that we're going to be doing with Mars in terms of that reinterpretation in a cosmological sense with the Jupiter from this new moon over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 months. So it sounds like a long time, but it's really not. And again, if you want to look at the energy that's here, that's present on the 23rd, if you just want to mark this down in your fucking calendar, I would suggest it, because this is when we're going to start to see not only the energies of the eclipse, I'm going to explain this in a second, not only the energies of the eclipse, but the energies of this Sag new moon come into vastly more clarity, because what we're seeing here is the south node in Scorpio conjuncting the partial solar eclipse point of late October that we had in Scorpio. We're seeing that. Not only that, again, Mars out of retrograde, but also out of retrograde shadow, as well as Saturn in Pisces, Pluto in Aquarius. This is not the last time that Pluto will be in Aquarius, because it's going to retrograde back into Capricorn very briefly in 2023, and then go direct for good into Aquarius at late 2023, early 2024. But Saturn is firmly in Pisces and not going back at this point. This is a vastly different energy, right? Jupiter is in Aries and is going to breeze through Aries, and in a couple of weeks it's already going to be in Taurus. But you can see here on this day, Moon conjunct North Node conjunct Venus, significantly out of orb of Uranus. But again, this is a whole sign. If we're going to look at a whole sign conjunction, this is pretty powerful energy conjunct the North Node, which again is going to bring up those themes that were constellated during the eclipse season of 2022, late fall 2022, which we just went through.
Right. So I always have a knack for kind of looking at wherever Chiron is rocking. So I've got my book Inside Degrees by Elias Lonsdale. So 15 degrees of Aries, super tuned in, the personification and embodiment of what it looks like, feels like, and is like to have an inside track on everything going on around you. Uncanny awareness. You have the gift of getting across new ways of being different. New ways of being, different ways of looking at things. Somehow getting away with being so very different that it no longer matters. So hot wired to wild and uncomfortable truths. You have a special radar for undertones, nuances, motivations, and signs of what is going on underneath. The direct front row seat upon who the other is and the challenges and opportunities the other brings before you. When you are ready and eager for the encounter, and you can always find a way to move with absolutely anything that might arise.
Yeah, so this moment in time, again, just mark your fucking calendars. If you're gonna do it, because you might as fucking well, right? Whatever. Mark your calendars for this, because this is all systems go.
Yeah.
If you can notice here, no planets are retrograde. Nothing is retrograde.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that Chiron pretty good here, right? I think this is the past 6 months, right, including the eclipse season, hitting a kind of perigee, or it's like the engine's been revving at the starting line, and this is where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to say I think we know where we're going at this point, and we know pretty clearly. And obviously, right, with Mars out of retrograde and out of retrograde shadow, we are moving pretty definitively forward. Again, this is a pretty slow, right? Mars has stationed direct and is breaking retrograde shadow. But again, right, if you want to think about, it takes a pretty long time for Mars to get retrograde, and it takes a pretty long time for Mars to speed back up. So I think we'll see over the weeks as it ingresses into Cancer, it's going to pick up some speed. But as you can see, right, if we're there, you go, finally fast in April. The Mars retrograde is a pretty significant transit if we want to look at really what we're talking about here over the course of the next 4 months, 5 months, even if we're talking about how long it takes for Mars to actually be moving at full speed. It's not a trivial transit. And this is really, I'm very Mars conjunct ascendant. Like, I think I would say Mars is my chart ruler. Mars and the sun. So this is really going to be a pressure point, I think, for everyone right now. Mars retrograde in Gemini square Neptune in Pisces is like a very, like, this is the way that things go. The way that things go is Mars. It's not like, I mean, any archetypal, like anyone who wants to do some research into Mars, I highly recommend it, because it's not like Mars is man and Venus is woman. Like, it's just so fucking stupid. Like,
yeah,
Mars is the way that things go. Mars is the pace. Mars is really like, if Saturn is the time lord, Mars is the time keeper, right? So if we're in the realm of Saturn in terms of time itself, Mars is the minutes and seconds. Mars is like how we are moving. So we could be moving like this is the way that time shifts and mutates, the way that time is fluid within the larger field of time, Saturn itself, space-time, right? Saturn, space-time, Mars, the actual way that we are perceiving the motion and movement of time, right? So there are moments in your life that go by in the blink of an eye, right? People have those experiences, but there are moments in your life that seem like they last for an eternity.
Mm-hmm.
Mars retrograde moving slowly in a sign like Gemini, where it is not at home, square to Neptune and Pisces, where Neptune is incredibly empowered. It's rulership. This is like infinity. Like this is like taking fucking forever. Like this is like nails against the chalkboard, like reverberating down a long hallway. Like the stuff that happened here in this eclipse portal is not trivial shit. Intense karmic stuff, and we want to process it, we want to leave it. But what Mars retrograde square Neptune retrograde in Pisces, Mars retrograde in Gemini square Neptune retrograde in Pisces is saying is that this is something that we are processing on the level of like our perception of time. And this is something that we're like in the field with it. We're in the field with this karmic dynamic, and it is like creating a alternate portal or alternate dimension of time where we're processing this information. That's super Uranus North Node to me. It's like we were in this karmic field of the eclipse portal, and now we are now processing that information at a psychic level, which is like profound and out of the realm of what we would normally call space and time. And it's kind of, I would say it's kind of like a spell. And that spell isn't necessarily going to break until we get Mars up to speed out of the retrograde shadow at the end of March going into April, which again is what we just discussed with Pluto and Saturn.
Yeah. Like, I do feel like even though Mars is basically urging us to do this deep reflection work, I feel like Neptune, like with it being square Neptune, that there's almost like an extra opaque shower curtain over that work.
Absolutely. It's like everything that just,
being where it is magnifies that.
It's just like everything that happened during that eclipse season is like being obscured by a veil. And that veil is like a metaphysical veil. And it's like we're trying to access it, but it's like these karmic touchstones don't seem like they're real. And they're not going to seem like they're real yet until we get out of this Mars retrograde firmly into direct. Yeah, the Jupiter stuff, definitely it's an amplification with the conjunction to Neptune, right? Jupiter is just basically like that Spinal Tap shit where it's like turn it up to 11 wherever you put it. That's what's gonna do. So this is nice though, because I mean, if we can just get ourselves in the mentality of what we were just discussing here, if we can get ourselves in the mentality of this Mars retrograde process, Mars retrograde in Gemini, and really rock with it, it's gonna be like this. We're gonna be able to access this kind of philosophical process that's coming after these eclipse nodes in Scorpio. Access this philosophical process that's being springboarded here with the trine to Jupiter and all the personal planets in Sag, that I think is setting us up for, and we'll go into the moons that come across this period of time, obviously, but setting us up for Mars breaking retrograde shadow and getting this shit off the ground here. Like, you kind of want to, like, you could think of it as like a plane taking off, right? Like, you get everyone on board, everyone's on the right plane during the eclipse season. It's like, okay, we're getting on our fucking karmic plane and we're going to take off, and everyone's like, okay, like, I think I know where we're going. And like,
but you're sitting on the fucking tarmac until March.
Yeah. Like, the pilots have to fucking check to make sure we know where we're going. Everyone has to make sure they have their fucking right tickets, and like, okay, like, we're making sure that we're going in the direction that we want to go in. Like, I want to go here and you want to go there. So we're getting that. And the pilots are checking the systems, and They're going over all the engine checks and shit like that to make sure the plane works so we can fucking get it off the ground. And 4 months from now, fucking plane is going to take off. So that's.
I almost think too, like, especially, you know, now that we've, you know, passed that major, or the bulk, I would say, of the eclipse energy and the reflection mode is now taking place. Like, for those things that might have like blown up or ended, or you started to question, based on what you're saying, it seems like at least how it could possibly play out externally to, you know, people who might cross this video, is that the solution is still not going to happen until March. So like a blow up might have happened, a disagreement might have happened, maybe some questions came in. Those things will continue to cycle basically until we get to that March 23rd where it's direct and out of shadow.
Yeah, with the Mars retrograde in Gemini, everything's up for a second look here.
Right.
So like whatever happened during that karmic portal, I mean, like even just in terms of if I was even going to speak personally, it's like that it's clear. It's like what happened for me during that is like, okay, this is up for being brought up later. Right? Like it's just something that wasn't going to get resolved at that point in time for whatever reason. This stuff, the karmic portal is going to bring these events to rise, right, to the surface. But again, right, if you want to think in terms of, we were talking about the moon cycles, this is the third quarter crisis of consciousness square between Mars and Neptune. So if you really wanted to look at the Mars in Gemini, Neptune, and Pisces themes, that's going to be something that I think is going to close in a lot more of a firm way, which is pretty wild, once Neptune and Mars conjoin. But I think that's a little bit of a different story, because what we're talking about here is the eclipse portal information. Right. And what Mars is doing is kind of relaying that on a very literal physical plane, the karmic metaphysical information. So this is all of that stuff is up for a second look. And the second look that's happening is an internal second look. And the second look that's happening is a cerebral or mental one. Mars retrograde in Gemini, right? It's not like, this is not Achilles storming the walls of Troy and demanding to fight Hector. This is like, okay, we're in the Citadel. There's not even necessarily a battle going on. Like if we wanted to talk about Mars going to war in Gemini, it might be something more like a not even a Cold War, because that would be more Aquarius, but like this is like a board game. Like Mars is
rap battle.
Yeah, Mars is playing like Risk or Battleship or something. It's like simulated on the level of like a game, and it's very cerebral, but it's also not cerebral in the Aquarian way where it's cold and removed. It's more of like a jokester cerebral, where it's like we're playing a game. It's like the All's Fair in Love and War thing.
It's a rap battle.
What's that?
It's a rap battle.
Oh, totally. It's like a versus. A great way to describe Mars and Gemini is that kind of rap battle is a great way to talk about it. That's perfect, because it's like two people, they're rapping back and forth. It's a physical activity, but it's cerebral, and it's based around a conversation or a dialogue. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's probably going to resonate with a lot of people in terms of the karmic information that came up during these eclipses, with Saturn square the nodes, square the personal planets, conjunct the South node, and Uranus conjunct the North node and Taurus. This is big. And I mean, we talked about it in the Aries full moon too. It's a lot of relationship stuff. It's like, how are these relationships going to work?
Right. Are they benefiting me?
Sorry, which
I said, how is it benefiting me? Is it beneficial? Is this something that still needs to be in my life, or is it time to let it go?
Yeah.
It's like a hamster wheel of these questions basically until March.
With Saturn square the nodes, right?
The process of reflection is still necessary.
Saturn square the nodes in Aquarius. That's totally, I mean, on a communal level and a societal level, but also in terms of our personal relationships, with Venus conjunct the South node, with Mercury, with the Sun, right? It's a new Venus cycle too that happened at the end degrees of Libra, the new Venus star point. End degrees of Libra, Venus star point is just like, I mean, doubly that theme of relationships and values. That's what I'm seeing play out here. Again, right, this is kind of pretty much in exactly a 4-month timeline here after this new moon. And if we can give it that time and not be like white knuckling it the whole time, that's probably going to be the way to do this. But it's going to be a little hard, right? Because I think a lot of that karmic stuff that came up during the eclipses was like uncomfortable and visceral, right? And what you want to do is, if we had a really, I don't want to say healthy Mars, but like very active and purposive and driven Mars, like if we had Mars in Scorpio or Mars in Aries, or even Mars in Leo right now, it's my personal placement. I got a lot of love for that. But if we had any of those placements right now, right, and it was Mars was direct in any one of those signs where Mars is very, very powerful and empowered, and it was moving direct and it was moving fast at a fast clip, I would say we're processing this information a lot better, a lot faster, a lot quicker, in a more efficient way. I don't necessarily want to say better, because obviously this is all happening in cosmic time and right time here. Right. But this Mars is not processing information in the way that Mars direct in Aries at full speed or Mars direct in Scorpio at full speed is going to be processing that energy.
It's like spinning energy.
Yeah, I would hope, right? I would hope that people would be processing it more from that all fair in love and war, and just kind of like, okay, this is a little bit of like a chess game that's playing out. I'm going to sit back, Saturn Aquarius, I'm going to sit back and let the pieces fall where they may and make my decisions based on that, right? I'm going to see what's happening, and accordingly, I'm going to adjust my sails, as opposed to spinning in the metaphorical drain, right? What is that? Is it Scylla? That was the like the whirlpool or the vortex in the ocean or something. That'd be a great way to describe this square. It's like spinning in the vortex of the ocean down like some sort of drain. Right? Mars totally out of control, being spun out by Neptune retrograde in Pisces by some sort of like mythology or conviction or belief conjunct Jupiter, which is just totally overwhelming this Mars and confining it or condemning it to a meaningless and unfulfilling existence, which for Mars doesn't necessarily matter. But right, if we're thinking about Mars in relationship to its ruler, Pluto, it's certainly.
Yeah, it I guess it's kind of one of those things where they're like you're saying, instead of running a marathon on the hamster wheel, take a walk and see what else you can see while you're on that walk, versus just staring at the thing ahead. Yeah. I mean, I do feel like the answers will come, but it'll come in like drips, because that's how Neptune acts. Very, very familiar with Neptunian energy. So it's there, but it's almost like if you run yourself into exhaustion, you will miss all of that. All those little signs, all those little cues that'll let you know, here's how I should move forward. Yeah.
Now that we're leaving this eclipse portal, right, which we will be leaving on the new moon, this is a Mars ruled situation for the next 4 months. Yeah. I'm just going to say that it's a Mars ruled situation, and the more that we can understand and relate to and kind of sit with and embody that Mars retrograde in Gemini energy, the better we're going to be able to handle this. Because if we're talking about, right, we went over the long periods of time with the outer planetary transits, the 60 years, the 2010s and 2020s at the beginning of the video. But what we're talking about here for the next 4 months is a very personal planet ruled period of time. And the personal planet that's ruling this period of time is going to be this Mars retrograde, stationing direct and entering Cancer at the beginning of April.
All right.
That's all that I got. If you wanna pull cards, I don't know what you want to do.
Did we want to talk about the Pluto return more, or save that for a different video?
I don't care. I mean, yeah. What do you have anything that you want to bring up about it?
Nothing in particular, to be honest with you. The thing I was most curious about and how, like I said, it would affect that was the actual starting charts of the two primary parties that we have here in the US. Because I just feel like, you know, we talk about the United States as like a conglomerate and the government and yada, 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 all that stuff. But ultimately, it's basically ran by two groups. So instead of looking at the US chart overall, it makes sense to kind of look at those two groups and see what's playing out. But yeah, okay, let me pull a card. That's hilarious. Okay. So the card that came out is the Princess of Wands, and it represents the dancer. This particular card has a dancer who is half naked trying to fire breathe with a garter and literally a tattoo of a tiger on her thigh.
Ah, that's super nice. Jeez.
Right. And then bottom of the deck is the Four of Cups. And it stands for luxury. And it shows a couple sitting on the couch, one staring at their phone, the other staring at the TV, and the house is a complete mess. There's like milk spilt on the table, there's cookie crumbs everywhere. Yeah.
Nice. That looks like my house right now, honestly. No lie. No lies.
So, yeah, I mean, debauchery didn't come up. I mean, if I pulled more cards, I'm pretty sure it would, but this definitely speaks to that still, that energy still being present. The desire to tune out instead of tune in, I think is pretty high. Taking the easy way out or the lazy way out is also pretty prominent. Yeah, that's kind of all I'm getting for this, to be honest with you, because it's only two cards, so you know what came out in the bottom of the deck. But I do think that the deeper that we get into this energy, I feel like the more repetition that we're going to see of some of these cards. And so I imagine the next video we'll be able to go a little deeper. Is this just going to be our new moon video? Or are we going to do another one?
I mean, people like digging a hole. So like they're trying to burrow.
Yeah.
That's super like shadow north node Taurus, Uranus.
Yeah.
Dig a hole in the ground.
Cookie crumbs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is the Sag new moon video. I mean, we could get back together on the new moon if there's any like insights in particular, but like, I don't know. I think again, right, this is a pretty straightforward chart. There's not a lot about this, like similar to the lunar eclipse, there's not a lot about this that's really going against anything, right? I don't think there's necessarily really a counterpoint to this energy. This is really clean. All the stuff that's happening here is very clean. I mean, we could obviously bring asteroids into the picture, but I don't think that's necessary to really get the archetypal energy.
Yeah.
That's just more for specific stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess that's that then.
Cool.
Video over.